welcome back. I'm Di, and today I am bringing you my May wrap-up. In May, I was able to read 4 novels and 10 volumes of manga. In May, I really wanted to focus on Asian or Pacific Islander stories. I was successful in a way, but unsuccessful in another. I didn't really get to any of the Asian books that I have in my library during the month. And that largely has to do with the fact that I just did not have much time to read with my eyeballs. Almost everything I read in May, besides the volumes of manga, were mostly through audiobook. I did read some of the print here and there, but most of the story was absorbed via audiobook. So let's just jump right into it. I'll start off with the novels first, and I'll go into the manga at the end of the video. Before I was able to start reading my Asian authors, I did have to take care of a couple books that were non-Asian in background or by author. The first one was Night Film by Marisha Pessel. I was buddy reading this book with Janie over at the Bookworms Buddy in April, and I did not finish it in April. This is a thriller, so I'm not quite sure how much I want to tell you. There isn't even like a tagline on the front that I can tell you what it says. Yeah, I think that gives away too much on the inside flap. So I'm just gonna say that it's a thriller. I had heard great things about this from several friends on BookTube and people that I follow. And I was really excited to find this at the Dollar Tree, my local Dollar Tree, and so I picked it up, finally got around to reading it, and it was just okay. I am very confused as to what the hype is all about in this book. Like I said, I did absorb a lot of it through audiobook. This does have some multimedia in it, so let me just show you real fast. Things like this, and well, that's kind of scary. Things like this. And so that kind of made reading it with my eyes more interesting, but as I said, I wasn't able to do that very often. And so just trying to absorb it through the audiobook just wasn't, I don't know, the story fell very flat for me. It wasn't what I expected. The investigation wasn't very interesting, except for I think one part I was like, okay, it's picking up, this is gonna start getting good, and it just fell flat. I was so disappointed. This story was also very slow. I am not one that really enjoys slow, descriptive texts. I think that was my problem with Night Circus as well. It doesn't grab me. I have to have something where I feel like I'm either connected to a character or I really want to know what's going on in the story for me to enjoy reading a book. And for me, this didn't have any of that. I didn't want to know what was going on with any of the characters at any point in time that I was reading this. I still have no clue what the apparent twist was. I hear there was a twist in this book, and I didn't find a twist at all. I wasn't invested in any part of the story or the investigation. and it's just disappointing. I had so many hopes for this story. I had mentioned that I was buddy reading this with Janie over at Bookworms Buddy earlier, and she ended up DNFing the book. I stuck with it because I wanted to know if maybe later in the story things started picking up and I started becoming interested in it, and it just didn't happen. I ended up reading it to the end because I kept hoping for something and there was just nothing. I don't know if it's because I read so many mysteries that this just didn't intrigue me, but yeah, I ended up giving this one only 2 stars, and this was probably my most disappointing read of the year so far, unfortunately. The next book I picked up was Crime and Poetry. This is the first book in the Magical Bookshop Mystery series by Amanda Flower. This was a Book One Cozies Club pick for the month of May, and I had heard really great things about this one also. Several of my friends read it before I had pulled it out of the jar, and that just really intrigued me, so I was super pumped when I pulled it out of the jar for May. This one follows Violet, and she is rushing home to her hometown because her grandmother tells her that she really needs her and she's not doing well. So Violet comes, and turns out Granny is fine. But Granny has a reason for calling her home. Before Granny can explain why she lied to Violet, Granny's gentleman caller mysteriously dies. At first glance, it's obvious that he was murdered, and Granny becomes the prime suspect as it is found out that she was the sole beneficiary of all of her significant other's worldly things. I really enjoyed this one. It had just a touch of magical element to it. Not too much though. I was expecting a little more, and I'm hoping for more in subsequent novels in this series, but I was interested in the investigation. I had no idea who the killer was. It interested me how the bookshop worked, as the series title is called. It is a magical bookshop, but you don't quite know the ins and outs of how the magic works. There is a possible love triangle in the making. As you know, I've had an issue with love triangles recently in my cozies. This one didn't have any romance in it, which was so refreshing, but I do see the makings of one, so I'm kind of curious to see how that's going to play out. One of the potential love interests is the sheriff. I think he's the sheriff in this town, and he's Native American. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, and I'm really interested to continue with this series, and hopefully there'll be some additional magical elements in the next novel or several novels in the series. And I think that's just really my cup of tea. I'm really enjoying these stories that have these magical elements. I don't know if it's just what I enjoy reading the most. I obviously like reading mysteries, but these books that have the magical element to it seem to be the most enjoyable to me at this point in time. So yeah, really enjoyed this one. Was really great to have this to kind of lift my spirits after reading Night Film and being so disappointed in it. The next 2 novels I read were from the Gilded series by Christina Farley. I read these on Kindle Unlimited. The first book was called Gilded, and the second book was called Silvern. Gilded follows 16-year-old Jaehwa. She just moved to South Korea with her dad, and her mom has kind of recently passed away from cancer, and her dad is not adjusting well to life without her. He moves her to South Korea. That's where he's from. His family is also in South Korea, and Jaehwa has never met any of them or even been to South Korea before. Turns out that there is this kind of rift between Jaehwa's dad and her grandfather, and she's not quite sure what the rift is. She only knows that the grandfather did not want her to be in South Korea ever. Like, ever in her life. So she's kind of confused as to why her grandfather never wanted her to be in South Korea, and why her dad and her grandpa have such a strained relationship. Turns out that she is the descendant of Princess Yuhwa. In South Korean mythology, there is a myth called the Haemosu and Princess Yuhwa myth, and apparently Haemosu was infatuated with Princess Yuhwa. He wants to take her as his bride, but Princess Yuhwa is the child of Habek, who I believe is the god of water, the water god. And you know, I've been reading a series called The Bride of the Water God, so I'm not quite sure if there is a connection there, because in the manga that I have been reading, the name is spelled differently in English. It's Haebaek, and in this book it's Habeak. Now, I know that can be just a difference in the interpretation of the spelling in English, but I think it's the same person. Anyway, Habek challenges Haemosu to a duel, hoping to save his daughter from Haemosu, and he ends up losing. So Princess Yuhwa gets taken away by carriage to Haemosu's land, and she ends up being able to flee by using a hairpin to get herself out of the carriage. So Haemosu's had this want of revenge against any of Princess Yuhwa's like reincarnations. And long story short, Jaehwa is the reincarnation of this generation. So this story kind of follows her coming to that realization of why her grandfather never wanted her to be in South Korea, why her dad and her grandfather have such a strained relationship, and her trying to figure out what she believes and how she wants to deal with the information that she's handed. You may or may not know that I really enjoy watching Korean dramas. I do follow a couple of Korean variety shows, and so I'm pretty familiar with hearing Korean language, not so much reading the anglicized spellings, but hearing it. And these were available on Kindle Unlimited with the audiobook narration, so I opted to go ahead and listen to it via audiobook. Like I said, didn't have so much time to be reading with my eyes, and so I really enjoyed this narrator. She definitely pronounces everything the way I have heard it in Korean dramas or variety shows, and I was familiar with a lot of the terms that were used, so that was really interesting to me. The story was very engaging, and though it's not the story I was quite looking for, it's not very Korean in its feel. Like, okay, there's some Korean words thrown in there. There's the kind of background of South Korea. There's some gods, South Korean gods mentioned. But other than that, I mean, Jaehwa's a Korean American in South Korea. The school she goes to is an international school, so there are other American kids there. There's not much Korean language used, especially because she's learning Korean herself. So this wasn't very Asian. But it would be for somebody who has never read an Asian book before, I think. Nevertheless, even though it wasn't as Asian as I wanted it to be, I still enjoyed this story. It was entertaining. And so I ended up giving Gilded, the first book, 4 stars. I then followed it up with Silvern, which follows the happenings in Gilded. So I won't say anything about that one because it'll give away stuff. But Silvern just didn't grab me as far as interest or entertainment as much as Gilded did. So I ended up giving Silvern 3 stars, and I am now currently listening to the 3rd and final book in the trilogy, which is Brazen, and I am liking that one. I think as much as Gilded so far, so I'll let you know what I think of Brazen in my June wrap-up, or if you would like to see what I think of it when I finish it, please feel free to follow me on Goodreads or on Twitter or on my blog, and you'll be able to see my review of Brazen when that goes up. So let's now get on to the volumes of manga that I read. The first volume of manga that I read in May was volume 5 of Black Butler by Yana Toboso. I have been reading this slowly. My daughter had an interest in reading the manga. We have watched the first season of the anime and enjoyed that. So we've been slowly borrowing the volumes from our library. Volume 5 covered a different storyline than is in the anime. So I actually think that volume 5 follows another season of the anime, which is called Book of Circus. This story that was in volume 5 wasn't in the first season of the Black Butler anime. So, you know, I've kind of been struggling reading the first 4 volumes of this series because it was so close to what I had already seen. But this one was completely new material for me, and I was really interested in it. But I still ended up only giving it 3 stars. It was almost 4 stars, but I'm still not quite sure what's going on in the story, so it ended up with 3 stars. And we should be picking up volumes 6 and 7 from our library system when that gets routed to our library. The next and last 9 volumes of manga that I read in May were all from the same series. I read volumes 1 through 9 of LDK. This LDK stands for Living, Dining, Kitchen, and it's kind of like what they call their apartments, I think, in Japan. So usually my daughter tells me there is a number in front of LDK, so it'll be 1 LDK, 2 LDK, 3 LDK, and the number tells you how many bedrooms there are in the unit. So this one, you can see it says LDK. On the side it says living, dining, kitchen, but in the author's notes it also says that LDK stands for Love Dokyo, which also means love cohabitation, which is the basis of this story. So in this series we have Aoi, who is the girl, and she is living on her own in an apartment complex, and in moves in Shusei. I always pronounce his name wrong. I always think it's Shuhei. It's not Shuhei, it's Shusei, who is the guy on the front of this cover, and he is very popular in the school. All the girls fawn over him. He ends up moving in right next door to her, and they both live alone. Now, in this first volume, you don't really know why he's moving in and why he's alone. And I believe it tells you why Aoi is living alone. But anyway, he ends up doing something nice for Aoi, and so she in return decides that she's going to make him a meal, because he probably doesn't know how to make meals on his own. And so she's over at his place, they're talking, and she's cooking, and she kind of burns his apartment. So while the repairs are being done, he moves in with her, and that's how the cohabitation starts. This really is just fluff reading. I really enjoy what I've read so far. I've laughed out loud a couple of times. I do like the artwork, and so let me share more of that artwork with you. So like I said, this is volume 1, so I'll try to move it a little closer so you can see. Volume 2, volume 3, volume 4, volume 5, volume 6, volume 7, volume 8, and volume 9. And I believe volume 9 is the most recent published or English translation publication. I think so. I think volume 10 is still on pre-order, and that might be coming out next month. But like I said, I am really enjoying this. I'm glad I had started collecting it. I started collecting it last summer, I think. So they've been collecting on my shelves. I had volumes 1 through 8 for a while, and just decided to pick it up because I really wanted to read something nice and fluffy and sweet, and this just fit the bill. I ended up liking it so much I had to go out and see if there was another one available, and there was. I ended up buying this volume right away, and unfortunately my library doesn't carry this series, so I'm glad that I had actually been collecting it and had it to read. So yeah, each one of these got 4 stars from me. I'm really looking forward to volume 10 when that comes out, and I really enjoyed this series so far. So that is everything that I was able to read in the month of May. Now, I obviously didn't get to any of the Asian or Pacific Islander novels that I wanted to get to in May. I've just not had time to actually just sit down and just read. I have been fitting my reading in via audiobook because I'm able to multitask when I do that. I'm so busy right now with my part-time job and having also a full-time job and trying to fit in crafting that I really try to maximize my time. So being able to listen to an audiobook while I work on a craft or do something in the house or something with my LuLaRoe business, it just is the only way that I'm able to absorb stories right now. That being said, I am trying to at least fit in one chapter of reading with my eyes in the month of June, and so we'll see how that goes. I'll talk about that more in my June wrap-up. But I do still have that stack of Asian books and stories and Pacific Islander stories stacked up next to my bed. I really want to get to them this year, so you'll probably see some of those in my subsequent wrap-ups. Of course, you'll be seeing a lot more manga, as you can see over here. I have been collecting quite a bit. There's also some over here. I also have my novels over here, and that's just a small portion of the books that I have collected in my library. So yeah, let me know if you have read any of these books or mangas, or if you have any suggestions for Asian novels. I don't usually read contemporary novels, so if you have any recommendations as far as books that have like a paranormal aspect, an urban fantasy aspect, some kind of magical element to it, those are really the kinds of books that I am looking for, and I'm having a hard time finding those types of stories. So if you have any recommendations, or you know of any books that have Asian characters or are based on Asian myths, or that type of book that has a fantasy element to it or a paranormal element to it, please let me know down in the comments below. I hope you are all doing great, and until next time, take care and smile always. Bye.